And we are back for episode 4.3. Our episode begins right where the last one left off. Joffrey has died. Now in the book, there was actually a general consensus among the characters at that moment that Joffrey choked. Tywin attempts to comfort Cersei, and Tyrion, though he senses danger, waddles towards his sister. It's not until Cersei actually accuses Tyrion of murder that everyone's minds begin to change. As in the book, Sansa flees, but in the book, lots of people are running from the scene in a panic, which actually helps Sansa hide in the chaos. Book Sansa actually has time to run back to her room, change clothes, and grab her things. She's crying the whole way, though she's not sure if they are tears of joy. Now here in the show, Sansa simply escapes down to a boat, but we have to remember she was in the Red Keep. If it was so easy to come down here to the water, why wouldn't Stannis' men have stormed up this way during the Battle of the Blackwater? The book actually has an answer. Littlefinger had secret footholds carved into the side of a cliff that allowed him to leave the keep clandestinely. He actually leads Ned down this cliff in the first book when they go to visit one of Robert's bastards at a brothel. And of course, Littlefinger having an escape route mirrors Varys' escape route that he, Arya, and Tyrion use. As in the book, the bay is covered in mist. Now I will say there is a weird scene in the second book where Kat dreams of a time when she was young and the Tully family was riding back from Seaguard. This odd thick fog comes upon them and she and Lysa get lost and scared. Littlefinger ends up riding back and finding them. I'm not certain if Littlefinger rescuing Sansa in the mist is a callback to this, but it certainly reminded me of it. Now as in the book, Littlefinger has Dantos killed, though in the book it's done by Sir Lothar Brune. Sir Lothar is Littlefinger's prime crony who has been cut from the show, but who becomes more and more relevant in the books as the Sansa story progresses. Here on the ship, as in the book, Littlefinger begins to reveal bits and pieces of the wedding poisoning plot. But as I talked about a bit last time, the plot doesn't really make sense as presented in either book or show. Here in the show, Littlefinger reveals that Dantos was his crony and that the necklace was poison. And this more or less happens in the book with Sansa and her hairnet. The conspiracy and who is involved will be talked about in the next episode. Next we get an extra scene between the QOT and Margaery where they discuss the poisoning and Margaery's new wedding options. This scene begins to incriminate the QOT and exonerates Margaery, two things that don't really happen in the book. The only thing we really know about the QOT in the book is that she played with a hairnet. Next we get an extra scene where Cersei and Tommen are mourning Joffrey, and Tywin comes in and starts quizzing Tommen on what makes a good king. Now Tommen has been aged up considerably from book to show, and the show advances his age even further with this new actor change. Tommen is 8 in the book, and a young 8 at that, unlike Bran who is an overly old 8-year-old. Book Tommen is mostly amused by cats and making markings on paper. We aren't sure of Tommen's exact age in the show, but the actor here is 16. Here in the show, Tywin brings up 3 kings to shoot down Tommen's ideas on good kingship, which are holiness, justice, and power. The first is Holy Baelor the Blessed, who was a Targaryen king largely controlled by the Faith of the Seven. He was convinced to lock up his sisters and not have children himself, likely in an attempt to end the purity of the Targaryen line. The second is the just but gullible King Orys, who isn't in the book at all, and the third is the powerful King Robert, which is a bit odd for Tywin to be bringing up to Tommen, considering that Tommen thinks Robert is his father. Anyway, Joffrey's body is barely cold, and Tywin is already programming Tommen. Next, Jaime enters, which in the book is actually soon after he returns to King's Landing. Now we don't know too much about Jaime's thoughts on Joffrey in the show, but in the book, Jaime doesn't really care about Joffrey. He feels Joffrey was raised by Robert and takes after him. And he figures he can just make another child with Cersei and everything will be all fine. And next we have the infamous rape scene. Now when this scene came out, there was a bit of uproar among fans. The story of Jaime is supposed to be a redemption arc thanks to the influence of good old Brienne, and the rape of Cersei next to the dead body of Jaime's son kind of ruins that. However, there are a couple things to remember with regard to the book scene. First of all, in the book, these events are from Jaime's point of view, and the book is filled with unreliable narrators. So from Jaime's perspective, yes, Jaime does begin to force himself on Cersei, and then she gives in and essentially says, hurry up, and gets into it. But here's the thing, we have no idea about the events from Cersei's perspective. And the second thing is, even if this wasn't a rape, Jaime still banged his sister near the dead body of his son on the altar to the mother in a sept. If you're looking for a post-Brienne redemption arc, this is a hiccup regardless. Next we have an extra scene where Arya and the Hound are looking for things to do to fill time. Last episode they essentially came to the end of their Book 3 plot. So we get this extra story of them being on a farmer's land and being invited to dinner, and then the Hound stealing his money. However, there are some similarities to events in the book here. In the book, Arya and the Hound attempt to make it to the Vale, but then discover that the mountain clans are causing too much trouble. Tyrion had armed them, and now they had become more bold and dangerous. They do end up finding a village where the Hound seems optimistic about starting a new life in. He figures they can rest up and eventually find a way to send a letter to Lysa. However, the villagers eventually kick them out because he's the Hound, and they heard he's not that useful for fighting anymore since he ran from the Blackwater. I imagine the scene was an attempt to show the hardship of a returning vet. Vets may just want to start over, but society won't let them get past their past. Anyway, here in the show the exact opposite thing happens. The farmer wants the Hound to stay, and the Hound refuses. In the book, the village also has a girl around the same age as Arya. The girl plays with dolls and has not been scarred and aged like Arya has. This showgirl also has a doll, but she seems a bit younger than Arya and seems to have seen some tragedy. Next we get an extra scene between Sam and Gilly, where Sam mentions that he's worried about Gilly's well-being at the Wall with all the rapists around. This of course becomes a long multi-season arc for Sam and Gilly in the show. Interestingly, in the book, Gilly's safety around the Night's Watch is never an issue. This may be because Sam and Gilly arrive after Stannis does. His men may have created an extra layer of security. In fact, when Sam and Gilly are finally sent away, Sam thinks mainly of the dangers of coming fighting. And next we get an extra scene with Stannis, still on Dragonstone, finding out that Joffrey is dead, and harassing Davos on where they will find more men. They can try sellswords, but they don't have the coin. Which leads to an extra scene where Shireen is teaching Davos how to read, and he remembers, oh right, he can borrow money from the Iron Bank. Now this does all change things a bit from book to show with regard to Stannis' motivation for sailing north. As I've mentioned before, in the book, Stannis sails north after hearing about the wildling army coming. It's only at the Wall that Stannis even hears about the others and starts talking about them. This means Stannis came north because of the wildlings, possibly hoping he could use them as an army. Here in the show, Stannis was going to head north because of the White Walkers at the end of Season 3, and is now hanging out for some reason. His reason for sailing north, at least in part now, is to get sellswords. And meanwhile, back with Sam, we have an extra scene where he drops off Gilly in Molestown, where she's supposed to be safer. And since there hasn't been enough TNA lately, we have an extra scene with Oberyn at the brothel when Tywin arrives. The two talk about Oberyn's sister, and Tywin asks Oberyn to sit on the trial for Tyrion, and on the Small Council. In the book, the Small Council seat was actually already offered, as it was part of Myrcella's betrothal to Trystane back in Book 2. Tywin does ask Oberyn to sit on Tyrion's trial, though this seems to have been done over breakfast. All of this explicit talk between Tywin and Oberyn about the murder of Elia certainly never happens. One interesting extra addition they have here is that Tywin now is concerned about Daenerys and her dragons. In the book, Tywin never knew Daenerys had dragons, and earlier in the show, he was quite unconcerned with it. Next we have a scene with Tyrion and Pod where the two discuss Tyrion's upcoming trial. Now in the book these scenes are largely combined, with Tyrion being visited by his uncle Kevin, who is the main passer of official information. The merging of Pod and Kevin changes one big aspect of the meeting, and that's the mention of Sansa. In the book, Kevin implies that Tyrion could possibly blame the whole thing on Sansa, but Tyrion refuses and feels loyalty to her because she is his wife. This is despite the fact that in the book Sansa hated Tyrion and barely spoke to him. Tyrion is a real sucker for the abused sad girl. Another interesting change from book to show is the loyalty that Pod and Tyrion feel for each other. In the book, Pod is unsure if Tyrion is innocent, while show Pod is more loyal to the bone. Additionally, show Tyrion acts very selfless by asking Pod to testify against him in order to save Pod from any possible would-be assassins. I'm not sure book Tyrion would ever be so saintly. Meanwhile up north, we are introduced to the fan-favorite character of Ollie of Molestown. But then Tormund, Ygritte, and the rest of the wildlings murder his family and eat them, and send Ollie off to try to lure the Night's Watch into coming to them. The sacking of Molestown is actually a pretty confusing event in the book, so Jon rides through Molestown on his way back to the Wall and warns the villagers of the coming wildling attack. So they all come to the Wall with Jon, but then the wildlings rape, pillage, and burn the village down, even though it had been evacuated. So maybe not everyone left, or maybe Jon just forgot he evacuated the town. The villagers actually help defend the Wall against the southern wildling attack, but then weirdly Jon sends for them to help with the northern wildling attack. I guess they went back. Anyway, the Night's Watch then finds the village abandoned. or the remains of the village abandoned. Anyway, then we get this weird extra scene where Gren and Ed return from Craster's Keep. Even though they can't spare a man to go rescue Molestown, Jon feels they need to send men to Craster's Keep to prevent intelligence from getting in the hands of Mance Rayder. Jon fears the mutineers could be tortured there for info. And finally, Dany has made it to Meereen. Now, as in the book, the city of Meereen sends out a champion to fight in single combat. This man is Osnak Zo-Paul of the House of Paul. In the book, Dany chooses her champion, Strong Belwas, to fight him. Illyrio sent Strong Belwas, Barristan, and a third companion named Groleo, the ship captain, to find Dany and Karth. Strong Belwas and Groleo have been cut from the show. Now, the reason Dany chooses Strong Belwas is he's actually an ex-Meereenese slave. So if he wins, it's a symbol of the people rising up over their masters. Here in the show, Dany chooses Daario to be her champion because he's expendable. As in the book, Osnak pees in the direction of Dany to mock her, and then mounts his horse and charges. And as in the book, the horse is cut down, though here in the show, Daario throws a dagger in the eye of the white horse. One-eyed animals, and specifically one-eyed horses, are a reoccurring theme in the book, a probable homage to Bloodraven, a one-eyed albino. In the case of the book, Strong Belwas takes out the animal's legs, and then has a quick battle with Paul. Afterwards, Strong Belwas shits in the direction of the city, to mock the Meereenese. Here in the show, Daario simply pees in return. Now, the humiliation that Strong Belwas serves Osnak Zo-Paul possibly comes back to haunt him later. Later on, Strong Belwas is sitting with Dany and her husband Hisdar and eats a bowl of honeyed locusts. This is all in the fighting pit, and the House of Paul starts suspiciously leaving before everyone else does. It's still a mystery who the target was and who the poisoner was, but I would argue that the House of Paul was trying to get a public humiliation revenge on Strong Belwas in return for publicly humiliating them. Now next we get an extra scene of Dany impossibly making a big speech across hundreds of meters to the city of Meereen before bringing out catapults. Now you may wonder where she got these from. In the book, Meereen burns all of the trees, giving Dany no wood. But based on the stories of Viserys, Dany is determined to build siege weapons. So she tears apart Groleo's 3 ships and has them turned into battering rams, ladders, and catapults. So perhaps these catapults are also made from her ship. The show has her catapults deliver open collars in order to foment dissent among the slaves. And that's all for episode 4.3. See you in episode 4.4.